Today I visit with Peggy Sundberg. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode of the Hill Country Authors Podcast. I'm thrilled today to have Peggy Sundberg with us, a fellow children's book author, as I published my first one in December, so I can now say that.
Oh,
wow. Peggy, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
You're welcome.
Could you lean a little closer to the mic?
Sure.
Could you tell us where you grew up, Peggy?
Born and raised in Alvin, Texas. It's a small town used to be a small town, between Galveston and Houston. And my maternal grandparents or grandfather's family was amongst the founding families there. So it goes back quite a ways. But when NASA started opening up in the 60s, my father moved his office over to Clear Lake. So I actually ended up graduating from Friendswood, Texas.
And could you tell us a little bit about your pre-author professional background?
I was a stay-at-home mom after I got married for the first time my kids got into junior high. And then I started working in a library because I've always loved books and I love to write. So it was a good fit. And it was in Rochester, Minnesota, where we were employed with IBM. And so it was a great place to put my own feet into the professional world.
And what brought you to the Hill Country?
My grandfather's family had a ranch out here by Comfort that I only came to a few times as a kid, but I was one of 4 girls, and I was the only one who was really into the outdoors. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was very into the outdoors also. And so I spent more time with him than I did with my sisters, I think, sometimes. But he's the one who helped me with my horse all the time. He took me fishing. We did all kinds of stuff. But he owned the ranch out here with his sister where they would come out to go hunting. And I only got to come out here, I can only remember 3 or 4 times as a kid, but fell in love with hills because I was growing up where it was flatter than flat. And I would watch, of course, this was when we watched all the old Westerns and everybody was always hiding in hills. And to a kid living between Houston and Galveston, you have really no idea what hills are until you see one. And I know the first time I came out here, I spent the whole day running up and down this big hill behind the cabin that they had. And when I moved out here 10 years ago, I went to Bernie and looked it all up and found, because it's been sold, but it's still intact, believe it or not. It was 250 acres, I think. And I managed to drive out there and find it and see the little cabin, which was very nostalgic.
Oh, that's very cool. So what led you to a life of writing?
By the time I was and I tell this to kids in schools because I speak in schools all over the country. I tell them that when I was in the 4th grade, I distinctly remember realizing how much I like to write and that my teacher told me I seemed to have quite a talent for it. And so as I went through school, the teachers spent more time coaching me, helping me with that. And it just developed into something. I got to where I was sometimes better expressing myself in writing than I was verbally. So it's just something I like to do and seem to have a little bit of a talent for it.
I've read that you won a UIL award for writing. Can you tell us about that?
I won the Texas State Youth Championship. At that point, I had moved from Alvin to the Friendswood School. And at that time, Friendswood was a very, very Class B little school with, I think there were 40 kids in my graduating class. And of course, now it's huge because of NASA and the influence there. But at that point, it was a very small school. My journalism teacher coached me and coached me and coached me. And I have to give her full credit because she really coached me well. And I went through of course, the district, the regional, and went to state. And I won the state finals. At that time, there were 5 different categories that you competed in, and I won all 5 of them. And ended up winning high point above all of the big schools, which was, at that point, I didn't realize it was as big a deal as everybody else seemed to think it was. But now I realize it was kind of a big deal. And my big plaque has been put in the Friendswood Town Museum, which makes me feel a little bit ancient when you go into a museum. But I've seen it. I visited it. It's still there.
You mentioned your love of horses and riding with your grandfather. Where did the love of horses come from? besides
I-
the Westerns you watched on television?
My grandmother, there was a little pony ride, and my grandmother took me. If I helped wash dishes, I got to go to the pony ride. And this was when I was 4 or 5 years old, and I had my favorite pony that I always picked out. And it was just an instinctual thing. I just fell in love with the horses. I had a connection, and I started picking my friends by who had a horse and kept begging my parents. Of course, we lived in a cow town. What was a cow town? So my parents, especially my dad, was very pro doing this. And he bought me a yearling colt when I was, I think, about 6 or 7 years old. And he and I mean, we had friends who raised horses, but he was from Michigan. My mom met him at the POW camp when he was working there as a soldier during World War II, but in Alvin. But so he was not a cowboy, but kind of turned into one. And we trained that horse, and he turned into a great horse. I grew up on that horse.
I also read that you had a rescue horse.
I've had many.
Okay, well, tell us about that, because I'm familiar with rescue dogs, but I'm not familiar with
I've
rescue
got one
horses.
of those now too. I kept up with the horse thing all the way through. I think there was a gap when my kids were very little, and then after that I got back into it again because I missed it. And I've always had at least a couple, but my dream was to rescue horses, just especially old ones that nobody wanted anymore, and give them a place to eat grass and be happy for the rest of their lives. And so the opportunity never presented itself until I hit 50, actually. And my lifestyle changed because I was all of a sudden, after having been married, I was not married anymore. And my job was such that I could work from home with the computer thing coming along. So I got onto a small ranch in Western Colorado and built it up myself. I lived in the horse trailer for a while, and then I had a barn that I lived in when it got down to 20 below zero a couple of times, which wasn't easy, but got through it, and it toughened to me. But that's where I worked with a group out of Denver that rescues horses, and they would foster homes. At one point I had 4 of my own and 5 fosters living there.
Did you live on the Western Range?
It was west of Colorado Springs.
Okay.
On the eastern side of the divide.
Right.
So
tell us about your first book.
First book. That was my other lifelong dream. And I consider myself extremely fortunate to have both of these come true. First was the horse rescue thing. And I've always wanted to write children's books, but I wanted to write ones that were really had some kind of meaning. Because when I was growing up, there were a lot of books that you read that made an impact on you, especially like the little boy cried wolf and things like that you learned something from it. And when my kids were growing up, there were so many that were cute and silly, but you kind of go, where's the message? So I was determined if I did it, it was going to have messages. And I had tried writing several stories, but never really thought it was good enough. But I rescued a little horse. They called and asked if I'd take him in. And when I heard his story, this light bulb went off in my head. And I thought, my gosh, the story that I've always wanted to write is outside eating hay in my corral. And so I got busy and I wrote it. It's short. I already knew the story. So it took maybe an hour to do the first draft. But as I read it, I was like, I did it. I think I really have a book worth publishing. Well, I was working from home for a corporate vice president, and he decided to take early retirement. And I'm out there on this 40-acre property in the mountains by myself with these animals, and not near a town where I was going to get another job. And so I thought, well, I guess this is my time to pursue this dream of writing books, because I got the story sitting here. And so I researched getting a publisher versus self-publishing. My gut said that I had written something that was going to work and that was good. And it was just after the Columbine shooting. And this book is very much about friendship and tolerance of differences in a very happy way. It's just the story of a little horse that had been picked on by other horses. And as the story progresses, it even has another message that can be interpreted as a child grows into a drug awareness message. So it was a perfect story for the way things were going in the schools at that time. And I knew that I had a market there if I could tap it. So I did it myself. I took some classes on publication and went for it. And of course, I knew it was going to be expensive. And I got a severance check that was exactly what I needed. So I felt like things were falling into place for some reason to go after this. So I did. And I knew I had right down the road from me, I needed an illustrator. I wanted somebody who knew horses, that knew the body language, the eyes and the ears, and would get it right. I didn't want cartoons. And there's a lady named Pat Wiles who lived about 3 or 4 miles away. And I'd seen a couple of her, I met her a couple of times. I'd seen some of her work, contacted her. And so now she and I have partnered on 8 books. And she does an incredible job, watercolor artist. But everybody comments on the artwork being so amazingly, and she captures the emotions of a horse perfectly.
Could you say a few words about the emotions of horses and maybe compare that to emotions of dogs so that people
Sure.
would understand what you see and feel when you talk to a horse?
When I'm with a horse, the first thing that I like about why I like being with a horse and why I like mucking manure is it's something that takes the world away. When you're with a horse, the horse is a big animal. And I mean, I'm not scared of them at all. And I know how to handle and how to be around them. But I always tell people, if you're not used to them, you don't want to just walk in with a horse that you don't know, because when you're around them, you learn to read their body language. And just like with a dog, you can read their ears. You can read how their neck is. Their neck relaxed? Is their body relaxed? If their ears all of a sudden go back, something is irritating them. You want to make sure that there's just different things that you can watch for to see exactly what the horse's emotion is at that time. If it's scared, if it's nervous, if it's relaxed. They have a really soft eye when they get relaxed. So there's lots of little things you can watch for. And it's the same with dogs. You can read a dog by watching his eyes and ears. Same body language, same type of thing.
So Cowgirl Peg. For those who are listening to this podcast, we just had a smile about the size of the state of Texas. So I think we've struck gold here. Yeah. What was, or perhaps even is, the inspiration for Cowgirl Peg?
It was nothing planned. When I wrote the first book, Lonesome the Little Horse, when I got to the page where he came to live with me, because it is the true story of this little horse and how he got rescued and ended up with a new best friend, which is a goat. But he, when I wrote it, I got to that page and I thought, okay, what am I going to call myself? Well, my name is Peggy and people call me Peg. And I thought, I've been a cowgirl, I'll just call myself Cowgirl Peg. I was expecting kids to figure out that the horse was real, but instead they figured out I was real. So when I just started visiting a few schools where teachers knew me. And then they liked the book and they liked my presentation and they told other schools, and it's just really snowballed quickly in the first year, which was great. But I would get to towns and they would have a sign up, welcome Cowgirl Peg. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. And, I would go in a restaurant that evening and a kid one time just started screaming, I didn't know Cowgirl Peg was going to be eating here. So it's been amazing. There's no other word. It's just, you can't imagine what the feeling is, that you're having that impact on kids. And it has not changed my personality. I'm still who I am. But I guess it's my alter ego thing. But I tend to forget that I'm Cowgirl Peg when I'm at home or just being me. And then somebody say, hey, aren't you Cowgirl Peg? And I go, oh, yes, that is me. So it has been just amazing. There's no other word for it.
What are some of Cowgirl Peg's favorite adventures?
I've had a lot. I wrote one book that came out, was the one that came out in 2018, actually. My father kept telling me I should write a book about all my adventures. And I said, well, my life is not that exciting. Or he kept saying, write about your life. I said, but there are some crazy adventures, because I've always been an adventurous person. But I'm a very positive Pollyanna person. I always see the good in people. I see the good in things. And so when something goes wrong, and things do go wrong, I always just tell myself, learn a lesson, turn it into a positive, learn a lesson so you try not to do it again. And so that's what this book is. There's 7 adventures that started off great and didn't go quite right. And so at the end of each one, I ask the readers questions like, what did I learn? What should I have done differently? At the end, so they can think about, okay, how would you turn this into a learning lesson? But then at the end of it, I have little summaries of what I think I learned on each one. So, but three cool adventures. I had the honor to be the horse manager on some covered wagon train adventures. The first one went across Western Wyoming in the middle of the summer, which was really hard. I think we had maybe 20 covered wagons pulled by mules. We had some outriders, and it was learning. It was a hard way in firsthand learning of pioneer life and how they survived. It was really rugged. And there were a lot of things. We had a wagon that overturned in a ditch. We had a broken wagon tongue and the mules bolted. And so there were a lot of things that happened to us that would have happened in pioneer life. And then we did another one in New Mexico on the Old Spanish Trail. And that one was really, also in the summer, it was really hot and really hard. But those were amazing ways to learn a different way of life and how hard it was to be a pioneer, especially crossing out through the West. And the other one would be I backpacked the Grand Canyon for my 65th birthday with my cousin and a bunch of friends. And we were down there we backpacked down with 35-pound packs on our back and stayed down for 5 nights and then had to get back up out of there. And that was truly an accomplishment that I love thinking about.
Yes. I've been to the Grand Canyon, but not backpack down or up.
You have to do a lot of training, believe me.
Let's move to your latest book, and I hope I get this right. Crooze on Croozer?
Cruise on.
Crooze
on Croozer.
Crooze on Croozer.
Yes.
This one went in a very different direction, so I'm really intrigued. What was the inspiration for Crooze?
That was also not planned. I have 7 books out, and every year I go. I was not planning on writing anymore because I was just going to coast along into retirement and have fun with them, doing book signings and still speaking in schools around the country, which I love to do. But I do the Cheyenne Rodeo every year because I used to live up that way, and I was there last year, and a lady walked up out of the blue and asked me if I would like to write a book about her dog. Well, I'm going to preface this with a little bit of something. My 97-year-old father died in January of last year, 22. And he and I were very close all the way through life, especially because of the horse connection we had from the beginning. And so before he knew his days were numbered, and he asked me to come stay with him for 2 or 3 days and nights, which I did. And we had a lot of talks, and he mostly talked and I listened. But he said, your mom and I are so proud, and she was already gone. And he said, we're so proud of the books that you've written, and I want you to keep writing them. And I said, well, I wasn't really planning on writing anymore. And he said, well, write one more for me. And I said, only if it just kind of falls on me from somewhere, because I'm not really planning on doing another one. So out of the blue, 6 months after he's passed away, this woman walks up and asks me if I'd like to write this book about her dog. And I think I said, probably not. Nicely, not rudely. But she said, would you let me share his story? Because I said, I'm not planning on writing another book, and I usually use my own animals when I do. And she said, can I tell you a story? And I said, sure. And as I listened to it, these bells were going off in my head that, oh my goodness, this would be an amazing book if it's written correctly. So I said, let me think about it. Give me your contact information. And all the way home on the 2.5-day drive, it's all I could think about. I was waking up at night thinking about the potential that this book had if it's written correctly. And that would be having to let the dog tell his own story, because he was born blind. He's a blue heeler. He was born blind and has an absolutely amazing story of accomplishment, and now living with the perfect family. And so the only way that story could work is if he tells the story himself. And that meant I was going to have to write from the perspective of being blind. And I was going to have to make it a feel-good book all the way through. I didn't want anything derogatory or negative, and I wanted it to be something that would inspire those who see with their superpowers other than sight, that they can do things just like Croozer does, and just might do it differently. And that those of us who are blessed with sight to realize exactly that it's a big blessing, and we shouldn't take it for granted. So that's what I was trying to do with this book. It was the hardest thing I've ever written in my life. I worked with the Texas School for the Blind and did some research and talked with them more than once about getting some information. So I made sure I was getting this right. For instance, if somebody says the word blue and they've never seen blue, what do they think? Different things like that. What did it feel like to fly on an airplane the first time if you can't see? If you can't see what's going on, then you're feeling it instead. So I just had to get a lot of information because I wanted it to present it in a positive way, but also to get it right. And so it was very difficult to write. There were a couple of times I stopped and thought, I'm in over my head. Am I really a good enough writer to do this? But then this inner voice would say, you can do this. You got to keep going. And so then I get back on it. And I have to tell you, when I finished the last 2 words, I was on cloud 9, absolutely on cloud 9. I looked at it and I was like, I can't believe I did this. And so it's a very, I'm so proud of all my other 7 books, but this one just touched me in a way that none of them did. And so when I got it, I always print, my books are truly American Texan products, except for my illustrator. The Schweike in San Antonio prints my books for me. And so I had them we ran 1,000 to start. And when I went to pick them up, I said, do you have one out? Because I had seen the proofs, but I had not seen the actual book yet. And they said, yes, we got one out for you. And when I saw it, the tears just rolled down my face. That was 15 minutes. I was sitting in the parking lot before I could drive home and I don't know why I did that, except it was pure pride, absolutely just pure pride to see that it came together the way it did. And my illustrator, oh my gosh, she really nailed this book. She saw the story. She's like, I am going overboard with this one. And so with all of the art is a full page on the right and text is on the left. So that artist or the artwork really stands out.
What are Cruise's superpowers?
His superpowers are his other senses: hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. He can. I just left doing a thing at the Llano summer reading program, and we zoomed in with him so he could meet them on the screen. And of course, all the kids just fell in love with him. And his eyes are sewn shut, but it doesn't look bad at all. He's just cuter than a button. He's just so cute. But she had picked up and had him waving at kids and stuff. But his superpowers are just that he gets through life. He has it doesn't bother him at all that he can't see, because he doesn't know what it means to see, which is what it would be for a blind person. When the book came out, we went to Sacramento and we're on CBS Good Day Sacramento. Croozer and his parents met me there, and we did it because her only request for this book was that I actually name the 4 nonprofits that were involved in his success of finding a family and being where he is now. And one of those groups that hosted us out into Sacramento to be on TV out there. And then they had a reception that evening, and he was at the reception. They turned him loose. And there were lots of people in there, and he was just walking around bumping into table legs, and it didn't bother him a bit. He'd just back off and go try a different direction. And it's just, when you see something like that, it's very inspiring, if nothing else.
So what has been either the response from kids or some of the lessons you hope to impart? Did they kind of line up together?
On the book,
right.
On the Croozer book?
Yes.
I mostly want kids to, because when they read it, especially kids mid-elementary, and I've got adults buying this book and telling me they can't quit reading it, which is really cool. But when they read it, it's thought-provoking. It's going to make them think about, hey, if I were blind, I wouldn't have ever seen the moon. I would never have seen the stars. I never would have seen flowers. But it's written in a very positive way. The way Croozer says it, as somebody said, he says, one of my biggest challenges was figuring out the difference between day and night, because I've never seen the sun and I've never seen the moon and the stars. So to me, the daytime is the warmth of the sun, and the evening is when it cools off and things are quieter. And that's the way. So he had to learn the family's routine, which the routine is documented on one page. So, and in the evenings, and this is where I had to be really careful to write in such a way that didn't indicate that he could see. So in the evening, when the family, after they have dinner, they always go to the living room, and there's this box that talks, and everybody listens to the box while he chews on his bone. And when the box quits talking, then they go to bed. Of course, that's the television, but to him, it's just something that's talking. So and I got a little silly with it when I got to the page, because I had to work Cowgirl Peg into the story somewhere. And so when we got to the page where Mama Susie, and he began calling them Mama Susie and Papa Tom. So when Mama Susie was at the Cheyenne Rodeo last summer, and she met Cowgirl Peg, who writes children's books, and they talked about writing a book about me. And then he says, I don't know what a cowboy and a cowgirl is. I've been around girls, and I've been around boys, and I've been around cows. So cowgirl must be a girl with a cow head. So my illustrator painted this really cool picture of me with a cow head standing there. And kids, when they see it, they die laughing, which is what I wanted. I wanted some humor in the book. And on the next page, then she explains to him, and there's this beautiful painting of a blue heeler running with a cow. She writes, Mama Susie explains to him that a cowboy and cowgirl is a person who works cattle and usually on horseback, and they do a lot of ranch chores. And then she explains to him that he's a blue heeler, and a heeler is a dog that helps him work the cattle. So he says, wow, I'm a cattle dog. I need a cowboy hat. So the very last page of the book, when it's him taking off to go on a cruise off on another adventure, he's got a little cowboy hat on. And on the cover, he's got a little cowboy hat on.
So what's next for Cowgirl Peg?
I don't think I could ever top this book. I don't think so. So I'm going to get out. We're pushing this book like crazy right now. We've got corporate sponsors interested. My biggest goal right now, the royalties on this book will benefit the four nonprofits that are in the story. And so that's the first big deal. That was the only thing she asked for that book, was that it does benefit some nonprofit rescue groups. But I've already got 3 blind schools that have contacted me, that heard about it and have gotten it, and they're converting it to Braille. The Texas school is converting it to Braille. And so now my biggest goal is to get it out to every blind school in the country. And so we're going to try to do a fundraiser and try to raise the funds to help with that. And also I will record the book on a CD, which the blind school in Texas has already given me the software for doing that. And that way kids can check it out at the blind school. They can check it out like they would a book and listen to the story.
But we're near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, if our listeners wanted more information on you, on Croozer or Cowgirl Peg, the series, what would be the best place for them to go? Absolutely. My website, www.cowgirlpeg.com. And it's got everything on there. They're on Amazon as ebook only. I tend to sell the hardcovers myself because it's just financially more, it's better for me that way, more advantage for me if I do that. Well, Peggy, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. It's been a great story, and I look forward to your next adventure. Thank you. This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Hill Country Authors Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. The Texas Hill Country Authors Podcast is a production of the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network. Thanks so much for listening. We look forward to visiting with you again.